Hi again. In F.F. Bruce, The Real Jesus, Chapter 10, Arrest and Trial. Here's the arrest in the garden. After keeping the Last Supper with his disciples, Jesus left the upper room where it had been held and went with them to a spot on the western slope of the Mount of Olives, across the Kidron ravine, where he had been in the habit of going with them. Judas knew that he would be going there and slipped out of the upper room before the others in order to lead the temple police to the place where they could arrest him. There has been a tendency in recent times to ascribe the initiative in the final action against Jesus exclusively to the Roman authorities in Judea. This has been in part a reaction against the monstrous calumny which has branded the whole Jewish nation of that day, and indeed of succeeding days, with responsibility for Jesus' death. Not only is this calumny lacking in any historical foundation, it bespeaks an appalling insensitivity towards Jesus' own people on the part of those who have claimed to be his followers. It must indeed be emphasized that Jesus was sentenced to death by a Roman judge and executed by Roman soldiers. Everyone knows this, of course, but what people know as a matter of course does not necessarily affect inherited attitudes or prejudices. On the other hand, the testimony of the New Testament writers ascribes the initiative to the temple authorities, and this is confirmed by the earliest Jewish references to the trial and execution of Jesus. This cannot be explained entirely in terms of a desire to exonerate the Roman administration from responsibility in the matter. It is not unthinkable that the Jewish authorities should have handed over an inconvenient religious teacher for the Romans to deal with. Violent reactions by the Jewish religious authorities towards one of their subjects, says Dr. Geza Vermes, and their handing over of him to the jurisdiction of the Romans do not necessarily imply that in their judgment a religious or political crime has actually been committed. The offense may simply have been irresponsible behavior likely to lead to popular unrest. That's the end of the Vermes quote. He points to the case of another Jesus, the son of one Ananias, who at the Festival of Tabernacles in AD 62 began to fill Jerusalem with his prophecies of woe against the temple and the people. Unable to silence him, the Jewish authorities handed him over to the Romans. By doing so, they avoided being charged with failure to do their duty and freed themselves of the necessity of dealing further with an embarrassing situation. Embarrassing because many people thought the man was a genuine prophet. The Roman governor had him flogged and then let him go. The spot to which Judas led the men who were sent to arrest Jesus bore the name Gethsemane, which means the olive press. Its exact location cannot be ascertained, but it cannot have been far from the place to which that name has been traditionally attached. Mark, followed by the other synoptic evangelists, tells how, before the arresting party arrived, Jesus was heard praying in intense agony of spirit that he might be spared the approaching ordeal, that the cup might pass him by. If it could not be otherwise, however, he submitted himself to his Father's will. In the prayer which he had earlier taught his disciples to use, the petition, "Thy kingdom come," was interpreted to mean, "Thy will be done." What he had told them about the kingdom of God was incarnated in himself when he prayed in Gethsemane. "Yet not I will, but what thou wilt." Mark 14:36. And he acted accordingly. 200 years later, the Alexandrian Christian leader Origen coined a Greek word, autobasileia, to designate Jesus as the kingdom in person. It was an inspired coinage. The men whom Judas led to the place where they could arrest Jesus were members of the temple police who were under the authority of the captain of the temple and his chief priestly associates. But John says quite explicitly that they were accompanied by Roman troops, the cohort that was stationed in the Antonia Fortress, or at least a substantial part of that cohort, under the leadership of their commanding officer, the military tribune. That's John 18, verses 3 and 12. Yet these Roman soldiers did not play a leading part in the arrest. Perhaps the Jewish authorities were afraid that Jesus might be attended by a body of men prepared to offer armed resistance on a scale with which the temple police could not cope. and had arranged for the presence of the Roman soldiers, lest there should be such resistance. As it was, however, their assistance was not required. Next time, Bruce deals with the chief priestly inquiry. I'll put in a link to Are we thy will people or my will people? Really, the human race can be more conveniently and accurately categorized by those two categories, thy will and my will. Now, that's based, by the way, on a video in the James Orr Basic Theology playlist. And I'll put a link to that playlist on your screen as well. See you soon.